Hey guys, welcome to Hooks of Hope Tackle Room. Today we have a very important guest with us, Dr. Chris Ostrander from the SOF Network. So Chris is a national certified counselor. He's been counseling for 10 years and currently serves as a core faculty member of the CACREP accredited clinical mental health counseling program. He also owns and operates a private practice along with his wife, Melissa Ostrander. He has specialized training in cognitive behavior therapy, brief solution focus therapy, family systems, EMDR, group therapy, PTSD, and a whole lot more. Chris is also the founder of the SOF Network, which is sofnetwork.org. I highly encourage you guys to check it out. So the SOF Network is a national nonprofit that focuses on serving the special operations community in three distinct areas. One is clinical. They have a clinical directory of counselors that specialize specifically to like treating active duty service members and veterans from the special operations community, clinical mentorship, and clinical research. So in 2024, SOF Network providers are projected to log nearly 14,000 clinical hours and surpass up to $1.5 million in services that are made free of charge to veterans and active duty service members. 53 of their 80 licensed providers come directly from the special operations community. The remaining providers all have had meaningful work with the special operations community and were vetted and endorsed by members of the SOF community. So, Chris, thank you for being here.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, man. So what got you, just tell us a little bit about your background.
Pretty typical childhood. Grew up in Wyoming, 3-sport athlete. Had 2 older brothers. My dad played college football. My older brother played college football. And so sports were just a huge part of our life. And then obviously growing up in Wyoming, I think like most people out there, just outdoors, hunting, fishing, the fall's all about hunting.
It's amazing out there.
Then the winters,
incredible.
Skiing, snowboarding, and then of course the summer, lots of lake time, and that's where the love of boats came from.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, Chris is also an avid fisherman, so he's in good company.
Yeah.
So what led you working with couples and individuals that are struggling with trauma and PTSD?
Yeah, so coming out of grad school, or rather going through grad school, I knew I wanted to work with couples because me and my wife were going through school together, same career, same track, and we just knew, hey, we really want to help couples, and so we had a unique opportunity where we were doing our practicum and internship to work with couples, lead a couples class. It was awesome. But actually, my very first client, so when you're in grad school, you do all your coursework, and then you get to the end of the program, and you've got what's called your fieldwork courses, and that's where you're actually working with live clients. Yep. And so the very first client that I ever had, one of my professors was leaving, and he just came up to me after class one day and said, hey, I know you're starting practicum, and he said, I have a client for you. I don't want to give it to anybody else, but I want to give it to you. I think you're the right person to work with him. And it ended up being a young boy who was about 11 years old who had been raped. And so, boom, thrown into the deep end.
Wow.
And looking back, I don't know why the professor did it, because he could have handed that client off to other professors that worked in that clinical space. But it ended up being just transformational for me, realizing, so much about trauma and just having a heart to work with individuals that suffered from different types of trauma.
Well, it's heavy. What's unique about trauma and PTSD to other diagnoses?
Yeah, a lot. So I think one of the things that there's a big misunderstanding is that when it comes to trauma, that once you've been diagnosed with PTSD, that it's lifelong. Yeah. And so one of the biggest things as a counselor educator and as a clinician I try and convey to my clients and my students is many of the disorders are a spectrum, meaning you may meet none of the criteria down here and then maybe 1 and 2 and 3, and then there's a point where you actually meet the clinical criteria to be diagnosed for PTSD or major depressive disorder. But it slides. And so you can have more symptoms to where you've got a severe presentation, or you can actually slide off to where you no longer are diagnosable. And I think this is one of the biggest things with veterans and just the general public at large. They just don't understand that, hey, you may have it now, but that's not lifelong. And I think the other big thing that individuals don't really understand about PTSD is this process of there's cures out there. And I know cures, some people shy away from that language, but what I mean by that is you can no longer be a diagnosable. You can be diagnosed, you can do good therapy, whether it's trauma-focused CBT, cognitive processing therapy, exposure therapy.
CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy.
Correct. There's trauma-focused CPT, exposure therapy, and then which is prolonged exposure therapy rather, and then EMDR. And so those evidence-based treatments with PTSD will take the individual, if it's done right and effective, and move them down on that spectrum. And so one of the biggest things I think people just out of a lack of understanding really don't understand it's not lifelong. It doesn't have to be lifelong.
The type of work you do with trauma and PTSD, it's super important, right? Especially within our veteran and active duty population. So what drove you to start SOF Network? And what is SOF Network for the people that are involved or are people watching? So
SOF Network, it's a national nonprofit that focuses serving the special operations community, active duty, retired. I would say, the bulk of our focus is on the retired population, but we do serve active duty as well. And then the families, that's a huge part of it. Mm-hmm. I think so many of the programs out there are focused on, the war fighter, and sometimes the wife and the kids are completely forgotten about. And
it's a family condition. Like it's when one person in a family is sick, the whole family is sick.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so, as far as how it was developed, one of my very first clients 10 years ago walked into the private practice I was working in, kind of walked into the waiting room, called a name, and as soon as he stood up, I knew like this was going to be a different session. And so met with him. He ended up being from the Marine Recon community, Force Recon. Yeah. And so just kind of had me spiraled.
This is in Wilmington?
Yeah, so this was in Wilmington. This was around 2014, 2015. Might have been early 2015. But just super unique, presenting problems. I'd never seen, obviously trauma before from the previous client, like I mentioned. But given his background, it was super unique. And so really quickly, him and I connected on some sports. He had a sports background. I had a sports background. And through that process of working together, we did some good work. And then he quickly, a few months later, him and his girlfriend were moving to the West Coast. Yeah. And so at that point, they would occasionally reach out, ask me, hey, who do you know out here? I'd look, I really don't know. Given the unique presenting problems, I just didn't feel comfortable passing off him to just anybody. Yeah. And I could tell he was super guarded. It took a little bit.
He was active at the time?
No, he was retired.
Okay, he's retired.
So it took, him and I kind of feel each other out, and I just knew it was just a different type of client. Yeah. And so what I didn't know was that was going to continue to kind of happen over the course of my career. Obviously, Wilmington. Yeah. You're kind of triangled between Lejeune and Fort Bragg. Yep. There's a lot of former operators and active duty special operators in that area. And so that kind of experience continued to happen where the wife would find me or the guy would, finally reach out. We'd do some work and then they'd either PCS. So, they'd change duty stations or they'd retire. And so fast forward by 2021, or let me back up, in 2018, I knew the bulk of my client load at the time was individuals from the SOF community. And I knew that was kind of who I wanted to work with long term. And me and my wife ended up moving down to Tampa. And I was wrapping up the Ph.D. And so I had worked on this project just kind of on the side. But once I was done with the Ph.D., I finally sat down and hammered out, this is the gaps I see in care from the civilian side and the special operations community. And so when I kind of just worked on this project and laid it all out on a piece of paper, I sent it out to a few people that I knew in the community, and it was all, positive feedback. Hey, this is needed. This is needed. And then so it didn't start out as a nonprofit. We actually just, hey, let's get a directory of clinicians that are really SOF competent as far as culturally, but then clinically as well. And then in the process, we realized, hey, we probably need to become a nonprofit. This is a great thing. And the great thing that we found was we kind of fell into this perfect space where we were meeting some of our partners like SEAL Future Foundation, Operation Healing Forces, and a few others that were like Special Forces Charitable Trust, the Pillar Foundation. They were like, this is great. We've got funding.
Such a need for it, man.
Yeah.
There really is.
But we don't have the clinicians. And because clinicians' licenses right now are still state specific, they didn't really have that network. And so we kind of filled this gap that currently existed. And so we just kind of went on a tear trying to find as many clinicians as possible. Once we kind of pushed that boulder up the hill and got it moving forward, now, people are reaching out every day. Hey, I used to work at a SOF command. I'm licensed. I'd love to join. Or former operators that have gone back to school. Yeah. And now they found us and say, hey, I'd love to be a part of it.
Yeah, the issues the veterans face, they're somewhat unique, right? I mean, a lot of other people can experience post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma. But so based on your experience, what are some of the specific issues that veterans deal with?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll go ahead and say I'm not a veteran, and so this totally comes from a clinical perspective of somebody that works with veterans. But look, in counseling, we teach our students, we're assessing biological, psychological, social, and then spiritual. Some programs teach that. The program I'm a part of does. And so biopsychosocial, spiritual. And so depending upon the veteran, just on the biological side, there could be a lot going on. You could have sleep apnea or sleep issues. You could have injuries. How many guys just in training get injured, whether it's parachute malfunction, car rollover, ATV rollover, just joints from all the rucks that they go on. So first of all, we have to assess the biological. Headaches, I mean, we could go on and on and on. If they, my brother-in-law, he's not in the special operations community, but he was on the howitzers for many years, and he was a mortarman for many years. He's wrapping up his career, and he just got a TBI check, and sure enough, like TBIs, plural. And going back to, standing next to those howitzers for years, the concussive blast. And so you've got just the biological, and that's, veteran specific, MOS specific, what they did, what they experienced, period. And then you get into the psychological, which PTSD, potential moral injury, addictions that are in there, loss of identity. This one's huge.
It's a big thing. Purpose is super important.
Really big. Yeah. And I kind of want to camp out on this just for a second. Yeah. So at 18 to 22 years old, you enter the service, and there's a thing in psychology where there's a theorist, Erickson, that he came up with these 8 psychosocial stages of, hey, you move through these throughout your life. And the one specifically around end of high school into college is identity versus identity confusion. And so the whole idea is you're trying to figure out who you are in the world. And so in this process, what do you have, whether when it comes to the military, you have this ready-made program or community that, tells you what to wear, tells you where to be, tells you the job you're going to have, tells you the type of a human you should be, right? And it's super rewarding. Yeah. Because these individuals that are really searching to figure out who they are in this world can step into a community and say, hey, this is who you are and this is who you're going to become. And they may do that for 4 years, or they may do that for 24 years. And when that's over, that loss of purpose, who am I? What am I doing in this world? It's all gone. And that culture shock of, this is my job, this is my identity, this is who I am. There's camaraderie, there's honor in that, there's appreciation. I mean, even down to like the E's and the O's in their ranking. Yeah. And then one day it's gone. And it's quite literally like stepping into a completely different country with different language. And hey, you may have been a fighter pilot. You may have been, top of your field over here. And now you're a civilian, and nobody really understands or cares at times to figure out what it is you did and and to what level you did it. And that's just, we'll speak general military. Then you throw in the special operations community and it's just 10X.
Hyper alpha, highly functional, highly capable people. And then all this, it's one of identity and purpose are really big things, right? In the human mind, they're super important, in the human spirit too. I've read stats that as many as, almost 50% of vets and active duty service members who are dealing with trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder don't seek help. What do you think some of the common barriers are for them in seeking help?
Yeah, I think first of all, you got to zoom out to that 30,000 foot view and look at the culture, right? So you got 18 to 22-year-old kids coming in, and right off the bat, I mean, they're, being pushed through basic training, and it's, hey, avoid this and focus on the task. And we're a team and we need you. And so your feelings, absolutely don't matter in this situation, because what are we concerned about? Mission completion, right?
Yeah.
And this is their sole focus. And so you can see how it's a double-edged sword. Like, we've created the world's greatest military, but at the same time, to a certain degree, when it's time to raise your hand, the whole culture it's been the complete opposite. It's others first, team first, you last.
Yeah.
And we know, in the military, look, over the last 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, the military's learned, like, hey, no, we've got to change that culture. And like, I was talking to somebody just the other day who was in the military for 30 years, and we were I think you were on that SOCOM call or presentation, and she was like, wow, the military's changed drastically, just the culture and everything. So they realize the problem, they're trying to change it, but just understanding the double-edged sword of, hey, you were told from the beginning, however long you were in, that your feelings don't matter, team first, mission completion first, and you last. And so now, once they get out, or maybe near the end of their career, or even earlier in their career, they just need some help, right? They just need a small tweak, whatever it could be. That idea of like asking for help, they're kind of set up to fail.
Yeah.
And so, and yes, we would love for them to be 18, 19, 20, 24-year-old kids to have a little bit more objectivity and objective thinking, and be like, well, hey, this is what they mean over here about mission completion and others first and self last, but they do want us to, seek help over here. And I think 20 years ago, that the two parts of that message were completely lost. And now I think individuals coming in realize, hey, it can be both and. It's not binary. And so I think that's one of the biggest things. I think the other huge thing, and it's the elephant in the room, people talk about it all the time, is the VA. And I'll take it away from the government and even say us as civilians, whether you're talking about special operations, veterans in general, or first responders, what are these people doing? They're running to the problem, right? They're moving quickly in teams to solve problems. Whether, we were just talking about the tornadoes down here, right? And stuff was falling from the sky. First responders run to that. Yeah. But then when they need help, who's running to them? And I think this is one of the biggest things that people get frustrated with the VA is veterans are taught and encouraged through the military to move quickly to the problem and address it. And they get the complete opposite many times in their own care.
Yeah.
And so then they're left with, well, like, what was my service for? Does the greater community in the United States even care? Even if the family is supportive of the veteran. And so now you can see how we've kind of, as a general culture, created this, multi-tiered problem within our veterans raising their hand and saying, hey, I need help.
Yeah. Well, so, and it's not just them too. It's also like, this doesn't just impact them. It impacts their spouses. It impacts their family. So what are, how do you see this taking a toll on the spouses and families of those who are suffering?
It's huge. So specifically, I'll talk a little bit about PTSD. Actually, I'll put that on the tail end just because that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. One of the things that people really don't think about when it comes to the family, and I hear this from wives, and I do a ton of couples work, we kind of joke, but the wife is the other woman, or rather the military is the other woman. however you want to, and maybe I mix that up, but the military and the government is the main person that service member is devoted to. So when the branch says, hey, you're PCSing over there, you're moving, period. No questions asked. Hey, I got to stay late because of the job, or my commanding officer said we're doing X and it was completely unplanned. And so think about this from a wife, from a kid standpoint. You're living in a system where dad or mom or both, because there's some families where both mom and dad are service members, where there's a lot of unpredictability with their schedule and whether they're going to be here next year for next season for baseball or next season for football, because maybe they're going to be deployed. Maybe they're going to have some training op. Maybe they've got some certification or school that they've got to go to. And so you've got this very unstable system, and it really is dependent upon the service member's job. And then, okay, so that's just one thing. The other thing that I think is really, really important, and I see this a lot in couples work, is, you have 18, 19, 20-year-old kids coming through, and what's the main thing that they learn when it comes to effective communication? It's the chain of command, which is I'm in control, I'm the leader, I'm going to tell you what to do as a subordinate, and you're going to do it. And it works, right? I mean, you're from the business world, the chain of command in corporate America works, but it doesn't foster relationships.
Yeah.
Right? It fosters effective movement and behavior. Well, 18 to 24-year-old kids learn, wow, this effective communication, like people snap and jump when you yell and scream. And then what does the young kid do or 30-year-old do once he gets married? Well, once he gets upset or whatever, he starts barking at the kid, starts barking at his spouse, and expects them to snap because he's seen it work, but it crushes the relationship. It's an effective way to communicate over here, but not over here. And so that's another piece of it really affecting the family. So you've got this service member who's, primary allegiance is to their job and to their team. And then you've got really poor communication skills that are filtering into the home. And then we'll layer in any potential PTSD or any depression, any anxiety, any of those things that could be going on. And now you've got, it's a messy situation.
Man. So SOF Network, right? So tell us more about the SOF Network's mission and specifically how it's tailored to the SOF community, which for those, I'm sure most of the listeners know at this point, but SOF is the special operations community.
Yeah. So one of the things that I noticed when I was working with individuals in the special operations community is one, trust is at an extremely high premium. And so being a non-military member, non-veteran, just getting them in the door and getting them to realize hey, I'm not all, maybe what you think I'm going to be, and just getting over that barrier to get them calm and relaxed and actually engaged in the process was huge. And so one of the things I knew just from my brother-in-law, I mean, he was neighbors with a MARSOC guy, and you're not going to come from the outside and just step into that community and, hey, I'm here to serve, because they're going to be very, very leery of that. And so as we were building it, what I realized is, hey, there's people, or providers rather, that come from this community. And so, of course, they've got all the backing in the world, because they can say, hey, I'm a former Raider, I'm a former SEAL, and now I'm a licensed clinician, and here I'm going to help. And so finding those individuals to bring into the SOF network was critical. And so we've got former individuals that were command psychologists, command psychiatrists, like I said, former Raiders, former Rangers, former Green Berets, SEALs that have gone back to school, become licensed, and are now serving in various states and serving their communities. And so by bringing them under one umbrella and identifying them and promoting them, we're lowering that barrier so that service members, specifically in the special operations community, but our providers see veterans, first responders as well. We don't, specifically say, hey, you only have to serve X. And so that's a huge piece. Lowering the barrier, the trust factor is already there. But then the other piece that's really important is whenever they do PCS or retire, And we have an open group chat among the providers. It's, hey, I have a client I've been working with for X amount of time. Here's the presenting problems. They're moving to this state. Who can take them? And I mean, what started out with that first client that I had, and it never really, that loop was never closed. On a weekly basis in our network, somebody's like, I can take them. I'll address them. And so now the handoff is literally minutes.
Yeah, that's great. There's a lot of talk about operator syndrome right now that I'm hearing more and more. So, what is operator syndrome, and why is it important?
Yeah, so operator syndrome. I'm going to steal a little bit of Chris Free, Dr. Chris Free's story a little bit, but he started working in the community. He was at the VA doing research in PTSD for years and years and years. And I don't know how, but somehow he got connected to somebody in the special operations community. And he thought, oh, I'm an expert in PTSD. I know a good bit about PTSD. This is probably super easy. And so he started working with a few individuals, I think, in the NSW community, and kept bumping into some of these other presenting problems. And so as he continued to work with it, being a clinician, but also an expert researcher, he realized, whoa, there's a lot more going on here. So let's actually look at it. And so him and his other authors on that paper came up with this term, operator syndrome, and it's a constellation of presenting problems. So it's a name to basically represent, hey, there's this constellation of problems within this community, and it really goes through that biopsychosocial, spiritual, like I mentioned. And so we're looking at, TBIs, obviously, really, really important. Physical injuries, individuals that have visual problems, sleep apnea, the endocrine dysfunction that's just, completely shot in some of these guys. They've got testosterone levels of 70-plus-year-old men at
Super
30.
Either ultra low or ultra high cortisol levels.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then you get into the psychological, obviously the low-hanging fruit of PTSD. You've got individuals with moral injury, which is a huge piece, that identity piece that we talked about, anger, substance use abuse. There's a few others there that I'm missing. That's just not off the top of my head. Yeah. The family issues, the marriage issues, the transition issues, and then existential. So many individuals walked into this community thinking one thing about themselves in this world, and in the process, they experienced and were exposed to a whole lot of humanity's darkest. Yeah. And that changes people. Yeah. And if they don't have a strong framework for what that is and who they are, I think they're left with a lot of questions on the back end. And so that operator syndrome is a great picture and description of like all of those. And so in the paper they talk about, it's a constellation of presenting problems and issues that we as providers really need to look at it holistically. It's just not the low-hanging fruit of like, oh, combat vet, oh, you got PTSD. No, there could be a lot of physiological things that happen. And actually Chris talks about that, that he focuses on, hey, let's figure out the physiological first, because most likely that's exacerbating the psychological.
Yeah, if your body's not well, your mind's not going to be well.
100%.
Right? Yeah. When should someone seek out a counselor or a therapist?
I mean, when do you take your car into the mechanic, right?
Yeah.
And again, this goes back to that culture. If going back to boot camp, we're told, hey, suck it up, buttercup, rub some dirt on it, keep moving forward. And that's a part of creating the warrior, which is needed. The other side of that sword is it's so hard for them to raise a hand. And so I think one of the things is them being aware of, hey, do I feel, quote unquote, on top of my game? And maybe that's just a first indicator of like, I'm just not sleeping as good as I wanted to, or man, there's some things from that last deployment that I just keep thinking about. Or trouble at home, right? Things aren't going well. Cognitively, I'm not performing as well. Maybe you're early in your career or middle of your career, and I'm not performing as cognitively as I feel like I should in some of these trainings, and it's causing issues within the team. It's a great time to reach out to, obviously, command psych, behavioral health on post, or if you're uncomfortable with that, that's another reason why SOF Network exists, to work with some of the active duty folks that don't want to stay on post.
Yeah, and finding, like anything, finding a person with experience, in dealing with those specific issues, I have to believe is super important. I mean, would you agree? And I guess, why does finding the right clinician, in your opinion, matter?
Yeah, I mean, it's no different like any other profession. You want to find somebody that is an expert and really understands what's going on, right? I'm not going to go down to, the tax person at Walmart that works for H&R Block to do my retirement funds, right? They're there for taxes.
Yeah. And
so somebody that's a specialist in specifically what I'm dealing with is really, really important. I can't tell you how many, I'm thinking of a couple different clients off the top of my head, but stories that I've heard where they've said, it took 6 sessions to meet with a clinician that didn't know anything about the special operations community just to explain what I did.
Yeah.
And to get them to understand, like, here's what my life was like.
Yeah.
Like, you have no idea. I've heard clients say, I literally made one clinician cry. I heard another client in the last year say, after 2 sessions, the counselor had basically said next to nothing, and then finally leaned forward and said, I can't help you. And so think about this. This is somebody that's finally raised their hand and said, hey, I'm going to go. I'm going to schedule with a complete stranger. I'm willing to share a little bit of my story, and then to be told by that expert, hey, I can't help you. And that's not to disparage that expert. Like, maybe they're an expert in something else, but clearly not working with veterans.
Yeah. I mean, there's different types of medicine, different types of doctors, right? I mean, the same thing holds true with clinicians or really anybody in the field. Like in my particular industry that I work in, I have a lot of expertise in very specific things, right? But those don't necessarily transpose to everything within the spectrum of, the industry that I'm in.
Right. And so one of the things, coming from a sports background, I'm a huge sports nut. I would love the military to kind of replicate, I don't know, financially, this is a pipe dream, but obviously as clinicians and talking with individuals and organizations, we're always figuring out, hey, what could be improved on the government side so that on the downstream of what we're dealing with, that there's less, or how do we solve some of these systemic gaps and problems? And, I think about college football specifically because they've got all the money in the world, is you go to like Alabama, Michigan, some of these major top tier programs, and they have behavioral mental health clinicians embedded in the team so that these 18, 19-year-old kids are forced to connect with them, build a relationship, and realize, oh, this works.
Yeah. See, in the business world too, with life coaches and right.
Exactly. And so I would love if the government made a greater emphasis of getting even veterans that have to be the special operations community, getting them exposed to clinicians earlier in their life to reduce the barrier, lower the stigma, realize, hey, this is actually helpful. And it's more of an asset. It's another person that is helping you as, let's say you're a mortarman or you're a pilot, helping you fine tune your craft so that you can be the best you can be, and that career is prolonged as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So veterans, really anybody, right? Anybody that needs help, that's considering getting help, seeing a clinician, seeing a therapist, what can veterans or anyone really do outside of therapy or in preparation for therapy?
Yeah, I tell my students all the time, when you're working with a client, one of the first things you need to probably look at and definitely assess, but potentially start getting your client squared away on, regardless of their presenting problems, is sleep, diet, and exercise.
Yeah.
It sounds pretty
Massively
basic.
Important.
Yeah.
But
sleep regulates so much.
Yeah.
Diet, we know, no different than our vehicles, like, junk in, junk out.
Yeah.
And so that diet, and not everybody's the same, obviously figuring out what works for your body, is key. But sleep, diet, and then movement. We're designed to move. We're designed to work. And, there's tons of research that shows, hey, if you're not getting out and exercising regularly, this affects your mental health, affects your physical health, affects your sleep, and the cascade. So, hey, I'm not advocating everybody has to come to therapy. Just get those 3 dialed in. Sleep, diet, and exercise are huge. And then I think about the other piece about us as human beings, which I think, your guys' program specifically looking at the mentorship is really, really important. It's the social aspect. I'm a huge introvert, like massive.
Me too.
Like And students ask, like, how do you work with clients? It's like, it's a little bit different, but I can work with clients all day long. And I you know, right. I want to shrink into my shell. I want to go do something. But the amazing thing, and I noticed it during COVID, you know, right. So COVID for us introverts, it was, you know, like the best holiday in the world. But the interesting thing I noticed was when I was having interactions with neighbors and going to church events, like how much I actually still needed that.
It's remarkable.
And so
connection is critical to happiness. It really is.
100%. And so whether you believe we're derived from pack animals, right? Or we're made in the image of a triune God, both of them say we're made to connect. And so, yes, absolutely. You don't want to come to a clinician, sleep, diet, and exercise, but you need to be connected. Yeah. If you don't have a tribe, if you don't have a community where you're deeply connected, that's a huge part of your general health, but as well as your mental health.
Yeah, for you know, as a believer, you know, you and I are both Christians. You know, I've always found it interesting that you know, when God created the heavens and the earth, and the book of Genesis, the first thing he kept saying, "It is good, it is good, it is good," right? But then the first thing he said was not good. He said, "It is not good for man to be alone," right? And especially in the veteran community, in particular, you know, those guys they're trained to fight in units, fight as a team. So, like, if you're struggling and you're a vet out there, or an active duty service member, anyone, if you're struggling, there's help. Don't go this road alone. There is help out there for you. There are teams of people who want to help you and help, you know, fight the fight with you. So, you know, contact an organization like the SOFnetwork.org, or reach out to hooksofhope.org. We will get you help. We want to walk through that journey with you to get you healed and get you restored.
Yeah, and I'll also add on that, like, working with clients in this community, I think I've seen firsthand how hard it is to connect. One of the things I also want to say is it's never been easier to connect in history. Yeah. One of my good friends from college, there's three of us that are still in contact, and we were roommates at different times, but one of them's a police officer in Pennsylvania. He's on a SWAT team. Another one's still in the National Guard, but has been military. He was a Ranger his whole career. And 3 or 4 years ago, there's an app, Marco Polo, where you can just shoot videos back and forth. Well, of course, you can do it on your iPhones as well, but specifically it's kind of organized there. The three of us at the last couple of years, really post-COVID, it's been so meaningful for all of us because we're all siloed off in our different communities serving, and we all see some of the same problems. But that ability to stay connected with people that you really, you know, look up to, admire, but they're also your peers. They can encourage you. You can encourage them. We're all dealing with the same garbage, right? We all have lives. We're all married. We all got kids. So important. And so one of the things I've found with my veteran population is once they get out, to your point, they don't have that team. They don't, and, you know, the guys are still serving, and well, the other guys that retired earlier, they're already, you know, into their second careers and have a hard time reaching out to them. Is I just encourage them and push them, like, hey, you got to go to that reunion. Hey, you got to download the Marco Polo app and just start reaching out to your buddies. And it's amazing. Once they do, all smiles, like, I can't believe I haven't done this in a while. Now we're going to go fishing or we're going to go hunting. And it's like, boom, they're off to the races. But that connection, it's vital.
It's super important. There's I got a question for you, because there's a lot of talk in chatter and, you know, content out there regarding psychedelics and their use in the treatment of PTSD. What is that all about? What are some of the popular methods out there? Effectiveness, you know?
Yeah. So obviously, there's a ton of noise about it, and I think I'm actually, you know, later today got that presentation. That's what I'm presenting on. Is you know, kind of state of the union, if you will, of hey, what's going on in the field of psychedelics. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of promise just on the research side of the effectiveness of psychedelics. So the efficacy, combating TBI, depression, PTSD, substance use disorder, end of life care. So the research that's out there to date, now the FDA just this August, they were in phase 3 clinical trials, or wrapped that up for MDMA. Yeah. The FDA rejected it. We don't know if the company that was running that is going to appeal. I hear some people say yes, some people say no, but from the individuals I work with and have connected with, I know like Walter Reed's got a program looking at it. Last year at the SOCOM Care Coalition, they were talking about it. So a lot of really important, and then obviously major academic institutions, Stanford, Harvard, Emory, I mean, you name Hopkins, you name one, they're all looking at it. Hence, all this research is coming out. One of the biggest things is large populations and large studies. So most of the studies that have been done to date are much smaller, and so it's harder to generalize some of those results. But the small results that are there, the efficacy is there. So specifically ibogaine, MDMA, ayahuasca, there's peyote. I'm missing another one. It'll come to me.
Psilocybin maybe, or
psilocybin, yes. Yeah. Thank you. Psilocybin are mushrooms for individuals that don't recognize that name. And so there's a tremendous promise. I think the legalization is going to be a huge piece. Another thing that me and one of our board members talk about is, and we're partners, SOF Network's partners with two great organizations, Heroic Hearts that does these treatment ceremonies, and then Vet Solutions. And they've helped a tremendous amount of individuals in this space.
I've seen testimonies of a lot of people that have had tremendous success with it and have just life-changing experiences and profound experiences that has really helped them heal. I don't know that much about it other than, things I learned about it in college, for other things,
And so one of the biggest things that some of these organizations that we work with and then us as clinicians also see is if people go thinking it's the miracle drug, it's not. You can't just go do one treatment and things are great. This is something that we see paired with therapy, highly effective. One of the biggest things that I think as a clinician I have to warn is like, one, legally as a clinician, licensed clinician, I can't endorse and say, hey, to one of my clients, I think you need to do this. Legally, I can't and tell that. If a client says, hey, I want to do this, great. Let's talk about which organization. I think getting the right organization is really, really important because some of these facilities, they're doing it at a medical facility. They've got EKGs ahead of time.
Are these psychiatrists that administer this?
Yeah, MDs, absolutely. Yeah, they've got MDs that are administering the medication and in medical treatment facilities. Now, some, they're more of a ceremony.
I've heard about those.
And so it kind of varies. You've got a spectrum from, that to the medical facility. And then you've got trained licensed clinicians working with them on the back end. And so there's a lot of promise there. I think there's still a lot of questions, but I think it's a space that, again, as providers specifically in the special operations or that work with special operations in the veterans community, it's a space that a lot of our providers are familiar and getting more and more training because more and more people are seeking out that treatment.
It's amazing stuff. We're like in the golden age of all sorts of different breakthroughs, I think, with things like peptide therapies and just... we know more now about nutrition and medicine than we ever have. It's pretty interesting stuff. I want to talk about effectiveness of outcomes of your work, and what you've experienced as a clinician in this space. So, without sharing any confidential details, do you have any memorable stories or transformations you could share, specifically about veterans, right? And how they found healing through the SOF network.
Yeah. So one particular client, we started working back, 2018. He was coming out of a tier 1 unit, med boarded, super banged up. The four-headed monster, the biological, he had all sorts of injuries, psychological, same thing, social, completely cut off, existential, spiritual, religious questions there. And so huge testament to him and I started working with, and I could tell early on he was still really grappling with a lot. And the trust wasn't there, but the amazing thing is he started coming to me saying, hey, what about this? What about this? And was really engaged in that process, which was huge because once a client's really bought in to, hey, I really want to do therapy, look, I'm not going to fix anybody. If I'm working with you, it really comes down to you driving the ship. Yeah, I can kind of guide you along the way, but you're going to be the one driving it. And so him buying in was huge. He actually did. He was one of the early individuals in the community that went and experienced Ibogaine, 5-MeO, DMT. That's another one. And that was really a springboard for him, because when he came back in therapy, it was like jet fuel at that point. He really took off. And so, he was somebody that him and I occasionally talk about it to this day, that he was drinking, probably a fifth or more of vodka a day. And I could tell just looking in his eyes, like I wasn't going to stop him from killing himself. Yeah. He knew it and I knew it. But him taking ownership of it and that treatment changed everything. And so now he's second, third career, family reunited, like he's having a blast. And so for me personally, that's one highlight that I'll always hold on to, because it was just such a meaningful client. And I'll also talk about our pipeline. So this is something I didn't hit on earlier. The other piece, or one of the other pillars, is our pipeline program, where we've identified either spouses or former members of the SOF community that want to go back to school. They haven't gone back to graduate school, and so we're helping them either pick a graduate school, or they find us once they're actually in a graduate school for clinical mental health. Could be social work, could be psychologists. And so then we pair them with some of our current licensed providers from the community and mentor them through grad school and into their post-grad hours. And we have meetings. And so bring it back. We were having a pipeline meeting just the other day, and here was a former operator having a conversation with these other pipeline individuals. And he was saying, guys, I'm a veteran and I experienced everything. And I realized as a provider, having 4 sessions in a row of veterans, like it triggered the crap out of me. Yeah. Like I actually need to slow down and maybe only work with a handful of veterans. But just from a career development, but also as the clinician in him maturing and him sharing with that and just seeing everybody's response on that impact, call, right? They're like, oh, I never really thought about maybe I don't want to work with all of them because I still got my stuff. But just the development, the objectivity, that was a moment just for me as somebody that created it, looking at it, being like, wow, like that conversation was so cool and such an integral part of their development. And I could never deliver that, but him delivering it to these young clinicians, it was priceless.
That's amazing. Let's talk about listeners or veterans who, may be out there struggling right now. Somebody who's struggling in silence, what advice would you give them, or what would the first step be that you would suggest for them to take?
Yeah, well, it'd be kind of twofold. So listening to Trey's interview on the way down here was awesome. I would say to any teammate, could be in the special operation community, could just be a veteran, any teammate that sees a guy in their unit struggling, move towards him, go and have a real heart-to-heart, like, hey, man, I see you struggling with this. What are we going to do? Because I think, again, going back to that connection piece, they feel alone in that. And so if somebody's moving towards them within their circle of trust, huge. Now, if nobody's doing that, but the individual recognizes it, I think one of the most powerful things they can do is probably tell the one person that they don't want to tell that's going to be, a huge advocate.
Yeah. So if that's accountable, you mean?
Accountable, but an advocate. So one of the things that I recognize is I've seen over the years, and many times it's the wife, it gets so bad that finally the wife or a friend is like, I'm going to do anything. And maybe because they finally had a conversation and really opened up to the wife or the friend, and then the friend's carrying that, and they're like, I'm not going to let you die. And they just start advocating. And so I think, sometimes that's all you can do is call a friend and tell somebody and be honest and be transparent of like how bad it is. And then ask them like, hey, what do I do? Can you help me? Because many times they don't know what to do. They don't even have the energy to look. Maybe they're so depressed that, the idea of like, well, I'm going to get and look at all these veteran organizations or try and sort through it. That can be overwhelming. And so getting somebody that's a little bit more clear-eyed and focused and motivated, sometimes telling that one person is the difference in the world.
Right. Absolutely. So future initiatives and goals. What plans do you have and goals for the SOF network?
Grow. We want to add as many providers humanly possible to help the special operations community and veterans that end up utilizing our clinicians as a resource.
You have 80 clinicians now?
Yeah, I think we have 82. Probably by the end of the year, we'll probably be closer to 90, maybe only 85. But so the providers, we need to grow the providers. Here's the other big thing. The bulk of the special operations community from the GWAT area, the peak retirement hasn't even hit. This is what most people don't know. I've talked to people inside the community and confirmed, like, hey, is that accurate? And he's like, yeah. So we're 2 to 4 years away from peak retirement of people that have been at war for 20 years. So as much issues as we've seen kind of spill out in the last, I would say 5 to 6 years, it's been more predominant.
We're seeing that amplified.
It's going to be amplified. Yeah. And they need providers that they can trust. And so we're trying to add as many providers as humanly possible, first and foremost. Other piece that I think is really important for people to recognize is, if you come to me as a licensed clinician, I can't diagnose. There's no diagnosis in the DSM that says John's having marriage problems. John's having problems with his kid. And so it's one thing for people to be like, oh, they can use TRICARE. You can't. Right. And so then it comes down to benevolent organizations to pay for that. And so that's where we kind of fill in a gap, as well as many of our other providers, when somebody raises their hand and say, hey, I need help with my marriage. I need help with my kid. And so we need to generate funding as fast as humanly possible. Luckily, we work with some amazing partners, Hooks of Hope, SEAL Future Foundation, Special Forces Charitable Trust, the Pillar Foundation, like I mentioned, Vets, Heroic Hearts Project. I'm probably missing a couple more, but yeah, that scale, growing to scale is critically important. And then the last kind of pillar on our side is the research. And this is something our team is just now really, it's probably the slowest, but you obviously can't the government's not going to let you do research on this population while they're active duty. Yeah. And I was going to do my dissertation on this community. And one of the first things my chair said is, how are you going to make it generalizable? You might be able to reach out to one organization like the Navy SEAL Foundation, but the vast majority of what you're going to get is Navy SEALs. And so by having a network of providers that all work with members of the special operations community all over the United States and the world, now we've got ample data pools to reach into to do really good, meaningful research on transition, on marriage and family issues, on obviously some of the low-hanging fruit issues like we talked about, and start to publish some meaningful research on this huge GWAT generation that's coming out, already out, and about to be out.
Wow. You guys do great work. Just as a testimony, like we get calls from veterans where, we'll connect them with the SOF network and you guys jump right on it to get them assigned. It's been an amazing experience to work with you guys, and we're going to continue to scale that up because there's just such a tremendous need of clinical counseling within that community. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience about the importance of addressing the veteran community?
Yeah, I think one of the big things, and it goes back to what we talked about, is changing our perspective of them. They're not broken human beings. This idea that our veterans, they're so broken. They're these are some of the most incredible human beings you've ever met.
Most capable, yeah, absolutely.
Most capable as well, absolutely. And so treating them as such, I think, is really, really important. And I think that's one of the things all of our providers strive to do and recognize is, hey, you guys are amazing. You may have a knee on the ground right now because of whatever said issue that brought you in, but that approach and that idea and how we work with you is, I think, essential. Same thing with our first responders, same thing with our, I'll say, general military and veterans, is these people are awesome. And so I think the more that we recognize the service that they've given to our communities, to our nation, and we treat them as such, I think hopefully that puts a small dent in this idea that if they do have a problem, hey, you're broken, oh, it's the war vet with PTSD. Like, I think if we can move past that as a community would be huge. Obviously, yes, there's issues. They went through some terrible things. But let's not put that around their neck as an identity.
Yeah. For those watching or listening who want to support this mission, how can they get involved?
Yeah, so super simple. You can go to SOF Network. It's just sofnetwork.org. Hey, individuals that can only donate, $5 a month, that goes a long ways. You can do reoccurring donations.
It adds up. Yep.
We're at near the end of the year. If somebody's doing, hey, I've got end of year stuff, me and my wife want to donate to a good organization, great. If a corporation has an opportunity, they can do the same thing. They can reach out and we can establish a partnership. Hey, don't even donate to us. I would say, fine, donate to our partners. Donate to Hooks of Hope, the Pillar Foundation, which is an amazing organization that serves women, the Boot Campaign, SEAL Future Foundation, Operation Healing Forces. All these organizations that we work with do really meaningful work, Special Forces Charitable Trust. These groups do amazing work. And so I think, asking yourself, what can you do? First and foremost, if it's just write a check, awesome. Like, we need those people. If it's people that are, hey, I'm going to be mindful of the next time I talk to a veteran, maybe not put on the goggles of like, hey, they're broken, and actually engage them as a human. If it's somebody in your church or a local community, ask them, hey, who you connected with? Going back to that connection piece.
Absolutely.
You or we as a community as Americans can get more engaged with them, other than like pushing them towards, yes, benevolent organizations are helpful, but helping check in and make sure just as human to human, like, hey, neighbor, how you doing? Like, what can I do or what can we do as a group? I think sometimes there's that barrier of like, well, I don't know anybody that served, or, hey, they're some of the nicest and welcoming people. And I think just having that conversation.
I found the same thing. Chris, you're an inspiring guy, man. We thank you for the work that you do in these communities. It is incredibly needed and it's incredibly meaningful. You're literally saving lives with what you do, man. You're saving families and you're restoring and healing people, which is what we're all about. I really appreciate you taking the time to drive over here, talk to us, and we look forward to just continuing to growing the relationship and keep sending you guys.
Yeah, the feeling's mutual, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Absolutely.